All right, welcome everybody. We got a good crowd here today. Some folks that have been around this grant program for a long time and some new faces in the crowd today. So that's great to see. If you don't know me, I'm Brian Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness. And today we're going to be soft launching our federal fiscal year 2023 Continuum of Care grant competition. Exciting times. So joining me today is Helen Renfrew. She's our program and grants manager for the coalition. She is helping us out with the CoC competition for the first year for the Balance of State, but has been doing this for the Anchorage Coalition for the last 2 years. So super excited to have her help in this process, and she'll be a great resource for you throughout this competition. If you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so today this is going to be very introductory. It won't be the last time that we're available to talk about this. We're going to talk about office hours that'll happen throughout this process. But today we're just going to really provide resources that'll help you throughout this funding competition. We're going to talk about some of the lingo, the HUD. If you've ever applied for a HUD grant before, you know it can be really technical and jargony. So the goal of today is to try to make that a little more accessible for folks. We're going to speak to a couple changes from last year's competition, some of which are favorable for rural communities. And then we're going to cover what the next steps look like. So this year we're integrating a intent to renew process, which is basically a one-page form that lets us know if you're intending to reapply this year, as well as what the next 2.5 months look like for this competition. Then at the end, we'll hit pause on the recording and take questions and answers from folks if you have them. And anything that we do here in terms of like a Q&A, we have a running FAQ document that we're going to have uploaded to our website that you can go in case you missed something in the future. Next slide. Okay. So these links that you have on your screen, and don't feel like you have to feverishly write them down. We're going to upload this to our website, this recording and this presentation later today. But that top link right there is the one that you really want to know and have bookmarked. It's going to have all these links on that site. It's basically our landing page for the funding competition. So make sure to check that semi-frequently. We will be updating it from time to time as changes come in or new questions come in. So just kind of put a bookmark on that for the next 2.5 months and you'll be set. If you're really wanting to dive into the weeds and learn about this, this funding process, you can hop onto HUD's site and read their 125-page notice of funding opportunity if you feel so compelled. Don't feel like you have to. Helen and I have done that over the last, well, since July 5th, since it was released, and put a little short list of what you need to know in that on the website. And then you'll also notice that this process is very data-driven. That is intentional because HUD runs a very data-driven process. And for us to be successful in this and securing bonus projects, we want to be consistent in that approach. So these links that for the ICA, or the Institute for Community Alliances website, will take you to a host of resources that you can look at in terms of what the need is in your community, what data is available in your community, what data is available for your program maybe in there. So make sure you're glancing at that as you're going through this process. And then finally, we are asking that any questions you have about this funding competition, please send it to the grants email that's at the bottom of this page. If you send it to me or you send it to Helen, we'll do our best to get back to you in as timely as manner. But like the grants email, we'll be checking every single day. It'll make it easier for us to make sure we don't accidentally miss something, and we'll have a document of our back and forth. It'll make it a lot easier. Next slide. Okay, so basic 101 stuff. What is a NOFO? You hear NOFO all the time. It's a notice of funding opportunity. This process is multi-layered. What you're going to be most involved in is the statewide competition that we have. That's our application process that we're scoring here as a coalition, and then we'll recommend funding at the end of this. But there's a larger competition that HUD sees as a community-wide application. I'll talk about what that community-wide application is in a second. But essentially, HUD is looking at this competition as a regional competition. So there's 400 different continuum of care regions across the nation. And when it comes to like bonus scoring opportunities and whether we're eligible for that, they're looking at how we're performing compared to those other 400 continuum of care regions across the nation. So it's a little bit different how we look at it that versus like how maybe an individual applicant looks at it. But it's really important to keep in mind that the performance of your program or how your new project that you're applying for lines up with best practices affects the entire region, because HUD looks at this as a whole, not just your one specific project. So listed here are HUD's greater strategic goals. These are outlined in their federal plans to end homelessness. We won't dive into these specifics here, but if you go to the next slide, this lists the priorities for this specific grant project or grant program. And there's, I think, 9 of these listed. And we won't go into detail on each of these, but I do want to say on this thing, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little NOFO page 7 link. You'll want to read the little review for each of these. Kind of a sneak peek here, or for the folks that are on here, get a little bit of advantage. There's a question specifically asking in the NOFO this year, how is your project addressing these priorities? And so we aren't going to want to see just like, oh, well, we're just taking a housing first approach and we're trying to improve system performance. That doesn't really tell us anything. Be very specific how your project is addressing each of these things. How are you reducing unsheltered homelessness? How are you centering racial equity in your program? So just kind of keep that in mind. But these priorities here, we're going to be very much paying attention to it because it's what HUD is asking us to do. And ultimately, the CoCs that are going to end up being the most competitive in this process are the ones that are centering these HUD priorities in their application. Next slide. So just a little bit more of the lingo here. The collaborative application, I mentioned earlier how HUD sees this as a community-wide process. So in addition to your project application, our CoC staff, we're working on another application that ends up being about 80 pages long. It's a big process. And it's called the collaborative application. And this is something that we do ask for community input on. It's really just checking in on what are we doing to make sure our CoC is following best practices? What policies do we have in place? What trainings are we offering? How are we centering racial equity in our work? So it's just all these different things that HUD is asking us to do year round. We're answering those questions on behalf of the whole CoC. And it really has a huge impact on our funding. It's a very data-centered scoring system for the collaborative application, and it's very transparent. So we know that we're already starting at a disadvantage because one of the metrics that HUD looks at is how many rapid rehousing beds we have in our continuum year over year. And we know that our rapid rehousing beds decreased over this last year, which means we're going to lose 10 points for that category. So we have to make that up in other areas. But this theme that you'll hear is every point matters in this. We feel like we have made improvements that will make up for that deficit already. But every point does matter on this. We have had years where we've missed bonus funding opportunities in the past by 4 points out of 200. So we're very, very closely looking at every single question to make sure that we are maximizing our scoring potential as we can. And it helps us if in your application process, you're taking that same approach. The local project applications is what you're going to submit to us. Helen will go over what the timeline looks like for that over the next month or so. And that goes through a rank and review process here locally. And ultimately, at the end of August, our Continuum of Care board will vote to finalize the funding recommendations for HUD. That does not mean that your project's necessarily going to be funded. That's just that's what we send up to HUD and say, hey, we think these projects should be funded, but ultimately they do another round of review on it. If you are a youth homelessness demonstration project grantee this year, good news, it's a non-competitive renewal again. But you must meet the eligibility and renewal criteria that are listed in the application. That's pretty clear. I do want to say for our YHDP grantees, HUD is slowly going year by year in terms of making it from a non-competitive to a competitive renewal. So for Anchorage, they got their YHDP grant in the first year it was available. And this year, their YHDP programs are competitively renewed. So what that means, Helen will talk a little bit about the options for YHDP grantees, but if you are thinking of making changes to your program, maybe changing your project type, this is the year to do that because it's non-competitively renewed. If you were to do that after it turns competitive, then you're coming in as a new project application, and that's where it's not really guaranteed. And then finally, the eSnaps application. This is what you fill out into HUD's portal after the CoC recommends funding for your project. So this is something that you'll do in September, not now. Every year there's one or two folks that are like, oh my gosh, I can't figure out this eSnaps thing. And they're just doing it too early. So what you're filling out now will be the project application that is linked to our website on that link that was there earlier. Next slide. I think this is the last slide that I'm presenting before Helen takes over. So who can apply for this? It could be any nonprofit organization, state and local governments can apply, and also tribes or tribally designated housing entities. So if you are one of those organizations, you are eligible to apply. They do not accept applications from for-profit companies. It's just nonprofits, government, tribes, and TDHEs. You do have to demonstrate financial and management capacity to handle these HUD grants. They are not easy grants to manage. So we are looking at that in our application process. You have to be serving a population that's located in the balance estate, not Anchorage. Anchorage has their own continuum of care. They're doing their own project. I probably should have said this at the very beginning of the presentation. If you are an Anchorage organization, you feel free to tag along for the rest of this meeting, but you'll want to visit their website, which is aceh.org, and they have information about this year's competition. I'm pretty sure they're going to launch it here in the next week or week and a half. We do have a new portion to our application this year, which is basically a commitment list. There are requirements associated with these dollars that you use our homeless management information system to enter client data, that you follow coordinated entry protocols that are set by our CoC, that you're utilizing housing first principles. Those are all outlined. We're asking everybody to really pay attention to that. So when you're applying, you know what you're getting into and what's expected of you as a grantee by HUD. And then also, we do review organizations' past performance in this process as well. So if you're a renewal grantee, you'll see that there are a lot of questions asking you, how did this go last year? Or what did your data look like for this last year? And also, do you have any findings from HUD and audits that you may have? So we do take that into consideration. Okay, and with that, I believe I get to pass the baton over to Helen to take it away.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm going to start here in the midst of our HUD application process. In general, these are the 3 categories of homelessness that HUD CoC funds can be used to serve. There's been a slight change to the definition in category 4 based on recently passed violence against women or VAWA legislation. If you think your project will need to take those changes into consideration and would like to discuss that with us, please reach out to AKCH2 staff. Category 3, which is not listed on this slide, has to do with folks who fit homelessness under other program definitions aside from the HUD CoC ones. The likelihood of HUD approving a project that serves clients that fall into category 3 is basically 0. So we do not recommend you submit an application for that. The 2 Alaska CoCs and our congressional delegation are advocating for changes to the HUD definitions, such as including overcrowding, which would be more appropriate for Alaska and some other communities. We'll continue to advocate for those changes, but until then, these are the ones we have to work with. So expanded definitions of these categories can be found by clicking the link on this slide. Based on the information in the NOFO, any project type that is currently in existence and will be applying for renewal can keep the project type they have. An example would be a grantee with an operating transitional housing project. There are some project types out there that HUD will not accept new applications for, such as transitional housing. HUD is letting us know that they are moving away from supporting transitional housing projects. They're allowing joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing projects, which we think is a way to help organizations move in the direction that HUD wants us to. The only new supportive services only projects allowed will be those that support coordinated entry, implementation, and operation in a region. That doesn't mean that services can't be offered to clients. They just need to be provided under the umbrella of a PSH or RRH program. You'll notice that HMIS isn't on this list. The only organization that can apply for an HMIS project type is the HMIS lead, in our case, ICA. The rest of you can still charge HMIS expenses to the HMIS budget line item, but please don't select it as a project type. Okay, for anyone who may be fairly new to this process or who hasn't been living it pretty every day for the last year, there's an awful lot of information in the last couple of slides. I'm sorry, please don't run away. I promise that we'll be offering regularly scheduled technical assistance and other help. Once the applications are ready to go, we'll schedule and record a webinar where we'll go through each of the applications line by line. We're not going to just dump the info on you and then leave you to your own devices. So what's new this year? With the changes to the VAWA legislation, in addition to a slight definition edit, there are also additional eligible expenses for projects that serve survivors of intimate partner violence or trafficking. Super exciting for the Alaska Balance of State are the new rural eligible expenses. We're waiting for HUD to release the official list, but we're pretty sure that the entire Balance of State CoC will fit under their definition of rural. Payments for emergency lodging, especially for communities that don't have a shelter, repairs for housing units, and staff investments have all been added as eligible expenses. These could really be game changers for the realities of working in rural Alaska. And this last one, for those of you who are now getting less than 10% for administration expenses on your grant, this new rule means that you can make an adjustment to your budget to change that. The overall renewal amount has to be the same, which means you'll need to take it from another line item or a combination of other line items. But if you're interested, let me know and we can work the math. You need money for your programs, but you also need funds so that your organization can manage the programs. Otherwise, we aren't sustainable. So these are some exciting changes that are brand new to this NOFO. You'll notice, as Brian mentioned, a bigger focus on system performance measures data in this year's renewal application. Since HUD evaluates our system based on these criteria, we will be shifting to a similar evaluation. In the upcoming year, we'll also focus on providing trainings that show grantees the ways in which HMIS, SPMs, and HUD grant funding are all tied together. The answers in this year's renewal applications will provide a baseline for continuous quality improvement goals on a year-round basis. In order to be approved for any funding, any bonus projects, which is how we bring money into the CoC above the flat funding level, AKCH2 has to prove to HUD in the collaborative application that we are evaluating grantees and projects based on performance measures and objective data. Most of you have heard this before. With the help of ICA, we're doing what we can to make it as easy as possible for you to find the numbers we'll be asking for. So before knowing what amounts will populate this table, we need to hear back from HUD on an appeal that was submitted. Also, the formulas that HUD uses to determine the dollar amounts in these sections seem like they should be able to be calculated, but I'm here to tell you that I would have more luck getting the numbers right if the instructions went like this. If you hold up a black cat under the blue moon while wearing a pink smock and gathering raspberries on the north side of a south-facing hill with a tree on it, you'll see the stars move in the sky to show you the dollar figure available for your CoC bonus. Tier 1 is basically protected money, and the percentage in Tier 1 this year is smaller than it was last year. So it's 93% of our annual renewal demand instead of 95. What this means is that as this round of this cycle will be more competitive than it was last year, because essentially we've got 7% of our funding that's kind of not assured. So we'll have to do even better on our collaborative application in order to make sure that all existing projects are renewed. So we're going to wait for HUD to publish the amounts at some point this month before filling in these lines. I can still say that there's a 25% required match for all project applications. And as Brian mentioned, our YHDP programs will be non-competitively renewed or replaced. And so to talk a little bit more about that, grants are renewed non-competitively for round 3 YHDP programs. And that's where our funding programs came in, was in round 3. Applications still need to be completed and returned, but they don't need to be scored or ranked. They just move through the process straight to the funding recommendation lists. We'll be looking to see how the projects are progressing or how the grantees are choosing to make changes if they're needed. Replacement grants can be submitted as opposed to renewal grants if there will be major changes to the project. Replacements should be discussed with AKCH2 and must receive a letter of support from the statewide YAB. Expansion grants are not available for YHDP this year. YHDP is mentioned about 250 times in that 125-page NOFO. To be fully informed on what the options are for the programs, we strongly recommend that you read the applicable sections, especially with those that have to do with the flexibilities available for YHDP programs. You'll want to make sure that you make adjustments necessary to really dial in your project prior to entering the competitive renewal seasons in a couple of years. We think a couple of years. It could be as early as next year. So I'm at about a 50% confidence rate that combined bonus projects will be about $120,000. My guess is that DV will be close to 50 and CoC will be at least 70,000. Again, those are guesses until we actually get the information from HUD. HUD calls them bonus projects, but personally, I don't like that term. I think of bonus as being extra, whereas this is potential funding and we really can't count on it. It is, though, the only way to grow the balance of state system beyond flat funding. Oh, As in previous years, there are opportunities for both an additional DV project and a small new project. The DV project application does not need to come from a provider that only serves survivors, but the project itself must only serve survivors. If we score well, we are more likely to get additional money. The process may seem arduous, but it's the way, but it's just what we need to do. For the last 3 years, the Alaska Balance of State CoC has gotten every bonus project we've applied for. The more we are able to focus the project and collaborative applications on the things that HUD is looking for, the better we'll do. It's just that simple. So I'm a visual learner, so I keep trying to make graphics to explain HUD and the CoC process. Some are more successful than others. The YHDP, so in this graphic, YHDP programs can submit renewal and replacement applications. Current grantees can submit renewal applications, transition applications, which is if they want to change their project type, and consolidation applications, if they have 2 or more projects of the same type that they'd like to combine into one grant moving forward. Current grantees can also submit expansion applications as a new project, and anyone can submit new project applications for CoC or DV bonus funded projects. All of those applications will be reviewed and either selected or rejected. Then the projects that are accepted will be published, and those organizations will need to submit their applications through eSnaps, which is the HUD online portal. After a project application is submitted, it can be attached to an AK 501 or Alaska Balance of State priority list, which also lives in eSnaps. The collaborative application and the priority list with the attached project applications all get submitted to HUD in one packet. So here's our timeline for this year. The NOFO dropped on the 5th. We are doing an introduction and soft launch on the 14th. That's today. The intent to renew and the project applications, the intent to renew is due on next Friday, July 21st. And we hope to have both the renewal and new project applications available next Friday as well. The intent to renew is easy to complete, and there are instructions with it. Not only will it help us calculate how much money may or may not be available for new projects based on who's going to be asking for renewal, they'll also identify who the updated contacts are for each organization, so we know who to email with information regarding where to find the answers for some of the renewal questions on this year's application. Then all applications will be due to AKCH2 at the grants at Alaska housing-homeless.org on August 18th, which is 4 weeks after we launch the applications themselves. We'll have the funding recommendations published by August 31st, and then give folks 3 weeks to enter their information into eSnaps before we put everything all together and get it to HUD prior to HUD's September 28th due date. eSnaps is glitchy, and there are almost always problems with it over the course of the last week. So if we can get things done early, it's always better for us to shoot for an early date so that we don't have to worry about something glitching on the last couple days. And then this is a slide of the already scheduled open Zoom sessions. Our plan is to open it up. We'll open up the Zoom session, and then anyone can join at any point during the hour to ask questions. If you would rather not discuss your questions while others could be present, send an email to the grants@alaskahousing-homeless.org email, and we can schedule a private meeting for you. AKCH2 staff is available to answer questions and provide information.